Good morning. It's been a silent night, a holy night. And yes, now 2021 is finally here. We want to act like 2020 didn't exist and just move on. I read a commentary this week. It said, you go into 2021 with dreams. There's no other way to do it. You dream about what you missed and what we'll have again. The picture of what we're going to do once the pandemic is over. That's what's gotten us through 2020. 2020, it was a nightmare. We just want to picture life as being normal again and hang on to it. Is so many commentaries here at the end of the year. But I say, really, is that the deepest level of thinking that we can get into? A dream of returning to 2019? I think this kind of dreaming is a reflection of the real disease that's affecting American life. To me, the commentary there misses the point that has become all too clear. We're still going to be anxious. Life has been exposed. We are more vulnerable than we Americans would like to admit. A 60 nanometer virus has upended our world, and men's best efforts to combat the virus were really pretty feeble. Sure, we have the vaccine and the hope it provides, but then think of it, there's already new strains of the virus, and that's got us wondering, well, what's the future gonna hold in this world of viruses? The lesson of 2020, again, is that we are not in control. God is sovereign and He is on His throne. This is the real message of our time. And we need to think about it because we've had a message posted to our leaders. And the message says, the people of the province who survived are in great trouble. The wall of the city is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. That's a proclamation from the Old Testament, from 445 BC, and it speaks to our current situation. Because, have you ever heard the saying, all new news is old news happening to new people? That's Malcolm Muggeridge. Go look him up sometime. He's a fascinating man. The proclamation I read is at the beginning of the book of Nehemiah, and it speaks to us today. Even with the hopes of the vaccine, let's face it, our protective wall in America is broken down. Our gates do not provide us with the effective defense. Why do I say this? Well, we got 400,000 people died. That's the same number that have died in the entire World War II. And our leaders, well, they're not World War II leaders, that's for sure. But it's interesting where we're at today because this was predicted by Alexander Solzhenitsyn way back in June of 1978. No, he didn't predict the virus, but he did predict the shameful, broken manner in which America would face the virus. Because he understood what we now, that America the Great was in shambles. And he was one of the first messengers to send this message to America about its crumbling walls and broken gates. He gave the report to the leaders of today, way back in 1978, as he talked to the graduating class of Harvard on June 8, 1978. And the response of the class was he got booed. Yep, the Nobel laureate was booed by the students of Harvard at the commencement ceremony. Solzhenitsyn had lived through the Gulag labor camps, and his writing about it had landed him a Nobel Prize. But that June, he didn't want to talk about his experience. No, he came with a different message, a message that was unexpected. The West is spiritually sick, Solzhenitsyn told his audience, and it's ill-equipped to rescue the oppressed. Solzhenitsyn gave a grave warning to the West. The warning was based on Russian history, and the point was simple. His grandfather had told him the point way back at the beginning of the Russian Revolution. Man had forgotten God. He mentioned this in another speech a few years later. He said, "But if I were to ask today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous Russian Revolution that swallowed up 60 million people in Russia, I could not put it more accurately than this. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this happened." And I am here to tell you, Christian, that this is the message of 2020, the message of the pandemic. Our leaders in America have forgotten God. Didn't it strike you back last year? Where was the call to pray? We were in crisis in America. Where were our leaders? We faced the most significant crisis since World War II, and our leaders did not publicly turn to God. Our leaders did not feel any burden to call our nation to prayer. Solzhenitsyn had warned us, men have forgotten God. No, it's not why the virus occurred, but our flawed response to the crisis is because men have forgotten God. The walls are crumbling in America. The gates are burning. And we in America are trying to function as a republic without having the Judeo-Christian values that are necessary to uphold that form of government. When walls are crumbling down, Christians should read the book of Nehemiah, because it begins with a statement that says the remnant there in the province had survived the exile, but it's in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. So, my first point this week is, as we move to 2021, we should be feeling the burden of hearing this troubled report. God should be placing a burden on your heart, Christian. We have heard the news. We have been through 2020. The walls are crumbling in America. Now we need to feel the burden. Just look at what Nehemiah said in verse 4. "As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days." Have you wept and mourned for America in 2020? Change is going to start with feeling that burden. And I'm here to ask you today, what is the burden that God is placing on your heart? Then, with the burden, what did Nehemiah do? He prayed. He sat down, he wept, he mourned, and then he went into action by fasting and praying. And that's what we should be doing next. Nehemiah met the problem immediately with prayer. He felt the burden, and he spent time in prayer and kept praying. In the book of Nehemiah, he prays probably 11 times. And let's admit it, this is a good time for the American church to pause and confess our sin of taking prayer way too lightly. For me personally, prayer has always been a struggle. I often feel way too busy to pray. But then I read readers of the past, words from previous eras, and I realized that we're pretty shallow. An ancient named St. Chrysostom, 4th century preacher, who became the Bishop of Constantinople. He was famous for his speaking and his golden-mouthed tongue. Here's some words he had on prayer. There is nothing more worthwhile than to pray to God and to converse with him, for prayer unites us with God as his companions. Prayer is the light of the soul, giving us true knowledge of God. It is the link mediating between God and man. By prayer, the soul is borne up to heaven and in a marvelous way embraces the Lord. This meeting is like that of an infant crying on its mother and seeking the best milk. Prayer is the precious way of communicating with God. It gladdens the soul and gives repose to its afflictions. You should not think of prayer as being a matter of words. It is a desire for God, an indescribable devotion. It's not of human origin, but a gift of God's grace. The potency of prayer has subdued the strength of fire. It has bridled the rage of lions and has hissed anarchy to rest. Now, writings like that, it really helps to motivate me. Because, you know, those ancients, they had nothing to do except for come to God in prayer. They were pretty limited otherwise. One thing I hope I learned in 2020 is I need to spend a lot more time in prayer. And that sense of helplessness, that does drive us to pray. But after he prayed, Nehemiah did some other things that were very important. One, he got close. He went to Jerusalem for 3 days and he inspected the walls for himself. So he thought about things in proximity. He got close to the problem. A lot of times we don't understand the real problem until we get up and close. Get close to the burden, Christian. Fourth, get prepared for the journey. If we look on in the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah was a civil engineer. He understood what it was going to take to do the job. He gathered the necessary supplies so that he could repair the wall. He knew it was going to be a hard task. But remember, get prepared. We have to be learners. We have to sharpen our mind. And we have to get ourselves prepared for the future. A couple weeks ago, my wife was reading about a researcher named Caitlin Carrico. She is a researcher who for the last 20 years has been pushing the idea of using messenger RNA as a methodology for developing therapeutic treatments. She has spent decades on this research, has had multiple setbacks. She lost her job. She had a lot of doubt. She had to move to the U.S. to do research, but she stood by her conviction. And her work in 2020 is the basis for the first 2 COVID-19 vaccines. It took 20 years of hard work by her, but it finally paid off. Are we prepared in the American church for the challenges we face? Have we spent the proper time in preparation for the battle ahead? Or are we just seeker-friendly and focused on touching people's feelings and emotions? We need to build a better foundation. Next, it's important to acknowledge that we're going to see some challenges along the way. Repair work is hard work. It's easy to get discouraged, and there's going to be challenges. Nehemiah faced challenges. Just read about it in chapters 3 through 7. But the wall does get built, and he builds it in record time. And there are difficulties along the way. But don't get discouraged. Push on. And finally, be encouraged at the end, Christian, because when you follow the Lord, you will be able to repair the wall, and you will be able to bring peace to your people. And once you succeed, Nehemiah also tells us what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to celebrate and worship God and study His Word. Look down at chapter 7 and you note that the people come back to Jerusalem once the wall's completed, and then they celebrate. And they celebrate by reading the law and worshiping God. So these are the steps we need for 2021 and beyond. These are the steps for renewal. Feel the burden. Pray, pray, pray. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Expect some challenges along the way, but keep focused on the big task. And then celebrate the goodness of God by renewing your covenant commitment. So as we begin 2021, what is the burden that God is placing on your heart? 2020 exposed some crumbling walls in America. Now, Christian, if you've been attending our virtual Sunday school, you've heard this report. Now the question is, what are you going to do with that burden that God has placed on your heart as we move into 2021? And let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word, which is truth. And thank you for Nehemiah, who had the courage and the commitment and the dedication to rebuild the wall. In your name, amen.